Hello there. Thank you for joining me. My name is Danessa, and I'm really excited and honored that the Black Beauty roster asked me to come and do a demonstration for you. And today it's all about exploring color with an emphasis on women of color. Over the years, I developed some strategies that I use to really uh, find ways to amplify color, especially on women of color. And there's a few techniques that I use to make sure that when color is being used, it's a wow. Some of the things that I focus on are contrast for sure, contrasting tone, contrasting color. And secondly, I love to focus on how I layer products. And I thought, what better way for me to have this conversation than with a demo? So I'm going to invite my model, Jordan, to the set, and I'm just going to walk you through just my process in utilizing color from the very beginning at the start of the application until the very end. So I'll try and sneak in to see questions from you all. But since we have a short amount of time, I'm going to try and just make my way through the demo. And hopefully I'll be able to capture some questions at the end. So let me welcome Jordan.
Hi.
All right, you can have a seat here. So even though this conversation is about color, I like to think about color from the very, very start. And from the very, very start, I mean from the very, very start. So even in my foundation application, I'm thinking about how these tones are going to impact the tones that I'm going to be using on the face. So for Jordan's look today, I'm going to be using purples. And I'm going to be using a mixture of warm and cool tones, which is something that I tend to do often. I find that as many areas of the face and body that I can create contrast, the more dynamic the overall look is going to be. So I'm starting my application first with the body. And the reason why I start with the body, especially for women of color, is because as we know, we are more than one shade. So even as you look at my chest, it is such a different tone than my hands and the edges of my face. And the same here. I want to amplify these strong yellow tones that are appearing in her chest. But there's many areas of her face where she's actually really, really neutral. And there's peaks of red as well. So I want to make sure that I can make a connection to the body and the face. So I'm going to start with a beauty oil. And this is the oil that I'm using. This is the Danessa Myricks beauty oil. And I love this both for face and for body because often I'm applying color to the neck and the shoulders as well. And so the body needs that same level of hydration. This is a dry oil, so it doesn't really impact the finish of the products that I'm using. So I love to start there. So next, I want to amplify these two tones that I see in her body. In the center here in her chest, I'm going to use something that's a little bit warmer. And at the edges of her body, I'm going to use something slightly cooler. So I decided to use these two tones. This product is called Illuminating Veil, and it's basically a highlighter for face and body that's super pigmented and super long wear. And that super pigmentation is something that's really important, especially when you're working on women of color, because we need that color to really show. So I'm going to be using this shade Goddess for the inner portions of her body, and this shade Tempest for the outer portions. And as you can see, Tempest is warm, but it is on the slightly neutral side compared to slightly more neutral than our shade Goddess. So I'm just basically mimicking what I see on her body. I'm also noticing here with this yellow on her chest, I chose purple because I know that that color is really going to sing against her skin tone. So I'm always thinking about these contrasting shades and what's going to look best overall. Now, Jordan is stunning, and so I love working with her. Okay, so this is that deeper tone, Tempest, that I'm using along the edges of her body. And I'll blend it into that first tone. And for me, this process is about creating life. One of the challenges that happens with deeper skin tones, especially when the tones aren't a perfect match to their skin tone, it often creates this lifeless appeal. So I really like to hone in on how can I bring life to the complexion? And bringing life to the complexion is pretty easy to do when you're using light. And when I say light, that light could mean something like a highlighter, but it also can just mean using a lighter shade of foundation as well. And so I'm going to demonstrate on her face how I use all of these things, both light in terms of lighter tone and also light in terms of reflection to really bring life to the overall complexion. Now, before I go into the foundation, I really like to mimic what I do to the body onto the face. And so I'm going to be using those same shades of Illuminating Veil as an underpaint to her complexion. Again, one being a little bit warmer and one being a bit cooler. So that contrast is a really great way to create impact on the face, especially when we're talking about color. So I'm going to start with the first shade. This shade is called Goddess, and you can see how rich and golden that is. And I'm going to place this on the high points of the face. And as a base, I'm just going to add a drop of the beauty oil as well, all over. Jordan's skin is already prepped, but I really like infusing the skin with a beauty oil because for me, all of the products are going to move so beautifully on the skin as a result of that. So her face has been cleansed and moisturized, but this is just another layer of hydration, and I'm using that same oil. I'm going to make sure I get those ears too, because we're always making sure that that tone kind of blends in as well. All right, so back to Goddess. I'm going to add Goddess here at the high points of the face. And I also want to make sure I can connect all of those dots. I'm bringing it down to her chin, keeping in mind the overall shape of her face. Just making sure I keep these beautiful cheekbones high. So this lighter tone, I'm going to be used to bring light and life to the inner portions of her face. And by amplifying these tones, by amplifying these undertones with this radiant underpaint, the colors that I use on the remaining portions of her face are really going to shine. So I'm just going to go back in and make sure that this is completely blended before I move on. And we'll go to the other side. So again, this is Illuminating Veil in the shade Radiance. And it's really important just to make sure that we blend away all of those demarcation lines, but still get the impact in the areas where we want it. So now I'm going to go back in with that second shade, Tempest. And you see it's on the cooler side, but it still has a really pretty warmth to it. And I'm going to use this right underneath, just in the areas where I would traditionally sculpt and contour. And this is going to play right into what I'm going to be doing with the foundation in the next step. Put a little at the temples. And then I'll take my time and make sure that there are no demarcation lines here. And so this is really about, in the end, especially when I'm using like a performance-based foundation, that the skin always looks lively. Especially for women of color, that's really important, just to keep those beautiful undertones just really singing throughout the application. Now this blends away very beautifully, and you can see it really mimics her natural skin. So I just use the highlighters to do the same thing that her natural skin does. So now I'm going to incorporate the complexion. So I'm going to be using 2 shades because, again, I want to add light to the face in 2 ways. With the complexion, having something that's a little lighter, and also that life that I brought in with the highlighter. So using a smaller brush, I'm going to get right underneath those eyes and just kind of mimic those areas that I did with the highlighter. So just taking these extra few steps just to build that radiance and that life into the complexion from the very beginning really will help in just the amplification of all the other colors that I'm going to be using as well. So I'm basically just following exactly what I did, and I'm tapping right on top of that highlighter. And this lighter shade is, again, I'm just mimicking what her skin tone is doing and bringing life to these areas. One of the things that I definitely do not do, especially for a woman of color who has hyperpigmentation and multiple shades representing on their face, I don't like to take one shade and bring it all over, because then I'm going to have to work extra hard bringing these areas forward. And I also don't want to muddy up the complexion at all. So I just keep the tones true to what I'm seeing on her face. We're using very little coverage because she really doesn't need it. I'm really just making sure that I'm placing this just where it needs to go and that I'm maintaining the overall shape. And I'm going to go in with my second color. And you see I haven't even used a drop. So for her second color, I'm going to get deeper just to mimic what's happening on her face there. And I'm going to go in and apply coverage to the remaining areas of the face. So this process only takes a couple of minutes. It's something that you could do very fast, very easy. But for me, it's really important just to create that contrast and that life in as many ways as possible throughout the application. It really just helps to add impact to the overall look. And all of this is going to help all of those colors that I'm going to be using on her complexion to really shine. So we basically just did an underpaint of glow. This works really well also if you are working with a client that has a lot of texture, but you want the skin to be radiant. Applying their highlighter underneath is a perfect way to do that, because the complexion on top is going to give you all the coverage that you need. You can still use powders, and it won't impact that at all, but their skin is going to look lively. And so that's really my rationale for using this process. So I'm just making sure that there are no lines of demarcation before I move on to the next step. A little bit here. So even tapping over these areas, it's fine. These two shades mixing together still creates another shade. So it really maintains like this beautiful dimension on the face, maintains all the life in the complexion, keeps the skin looking lively. And it's a really beautiful base that's not distracting, that's going to really help to amplify all the colors that we're going to be using throughout the application. Okay. And then to do a little bit more shaping, I'm going to be using Contour Balm. This is Balm Contour. And I'm going to use shade Deep 1. And so I don't want to do a harsh contour, but I see areas where I can still amplify the shape. So I'm taking a little on the brush. I want to go through her hairline just a bit. Here. And then I'm going to go through those contour areas. I'm going to grab an angled brush for that portion. and just lightly add a little bit more shape. Let's turn this way. So here's my opportunity to really get into the hollows of the cheek, hit the back of the ears, the back of the neck. This is a balmy texture, so it's not offering like a heavy coverage. It's just a beautiful way to naturally shape. And it blends so beautifully into the skin. It's like an effortless contour. So I really just take the time to get a foundation that's already full of shape and full of life, so that any color that I use will really sing throughout the application. And here I'm just following those natural contours of the face, here through the jawline, using an angled fluffy brush just to kind of spread the product without giving too much concentration of color. And then lastly, I'm just going to go in to the sides of the nose and through the crease of the eye. And so for me, I'm happy now because I see that there's continuity between her body and her face. She looks really natural but shaped. The skin is really lively. We have contrast in all the right areas. And so now this is like a beautiful frame for me to think about my color placement. For me, placing color becomes a lot easier when the canvas is just clean and you left yourself like a roadmap of where to place color. So now let's talk about the colors that I'm going to use. One of the strategies, similar to how I build the complexion using things that are matte or have more of a creamy natural finish, and then using things that are more reflective to create that contrast that makes things look more dynamic. And so I'm going to be doing the same thing with the color. I want to do something like pretty vivid and bright. I'm going to be using this waterproof cream palette called the Vivid Palette, using some of the purple tones here. And this has like a matte powdery finish. I'm going to be using Color Fix, and this is one of the matte shades. Actually, this is actually a cream shade, so it has a little bit of reflection. This is Wonderland. And then I want to go in with something even more reflective on top, and I'm going to use this product called Twin Flames. So each three of these products have a different level of color intensity, and it also has a different finish. And so by combining these things, I can really amplify the shape, and by them being in contrast to each other in texture, it's going to really make them pop to create more of a wow. So I want to start with my Color Fix. This is a Color Fix in shade Wonderland. A little bit goes a long way. And this shade is going to be the base for my look. So I'm going to put a little bit on my palette, just about a drop. And I am going to take a flat brush and kind of paint this onto the lid. Let's turn to me a little, close your eyes. Because this is a waterproof formula that really sets and will not move, I don't need to prime the eye in any way. It really just gives me enough play time to place it onto the lid and then to blend. And the saturation of color is so intense, I don't have to layer it on top of anything else. So the one thing that I find is super important for everyone to have in their kit are creams. Because creams for me are the most powerful thing that you can have. They can work beautifully on their own and have more of an impact of color, but they also amplify the effect of anything that you use on top. So tools for me, creams for me are like one of the most powerful tools that an artist can have in their kit. They're also so much more easy to blend, and they play well with so many other textures that you can really be super creative in your application. So I've set that there. And now I just want to blend. I'm going to take a fluffy brush and kind of just blend out any demarcation lines. And I'm blending out the edges and blending it out into the complexion, because I want to bring these tones in multiple places. One of the philosophies that I use is called the power of three. And whether it be using 3 different textures or 3 different finishes or 3 different colors to tell a color story, or even placing a color in 3 different areas of the face, for me, when you use 3, it creates so much more dimension for any look. So I'm going to go in right now and even feather this out to look like 3 shades. So it's just built up really beautifully on a gradient from deepest to light. Using this formula helps me to use a lot less color as well. Like I can just use 1 color to create this beautiful color story. So I'm going to look and just make sure. Let me have you open, love. Okay, I can add even a little bit more color. So I'll take the excess on my palette. I want to blend this up a little bit more here. And I also want to add a little bit more color onto her skin. Adding color onto the complexion really helps to amplify all of the other products you're going to use, whether it be highlighters or blushes. You're having a color, a cream color base. It's just really a beautiful way to add dimension and kind of layer up all of the other shades or all of the other products that you're going to be using. Not only that, it's going to allow them to last forever. So if you're working on set, you don't have to worry about touch-ups. This is going to last you until the end of time. Okay, and I'm going to have her turn. And I'm just going to take this and kind of buff it into the skin here. Just kind of fading this into the complexion. Up through the temples. Down through the tops of the cheek. We'll do the same on the other side. One of the things that I like to do is to leave powder to the very end, because I use lots of cream-based products. And this allows me plenty of time to blend and to change my mind and to layer. And creams are really beautiful and dynamic in that way. So even though this is a waterproof cream, on top of the oil and the illuminating veil and the complexion, it still gives me a lot of extra playtime. And I'm just bringing this down through the cheek. And notice by having that highlighter underneath, it's like literally doing all the work. I still get the amplification where I want it. All of the colors look lively on the skin. And I just want to make sure everything is blended and balanced before I move on to the next thing. Okay. So literally I can be finished right now when she has on highlighter, blush, and a smoky eye. But we're going to keep going. I want to add a little of that shade, that same shade underneath her eye as well, just to kind of round out the shape. So I'm going to go back in with that shade Wonderland. And with a smaller brush, just kind of smudge that underneath the eye. And I like using like this small pencil brush just to keep it tight to the eye. And I'm going to have her just look up a bit. Okay. Just kind of framing the eye shape. Just adding a little bit more shape there. And once I get that first layer just close to the eye that I'm just going to blend down. Very similar to what I did on the top lid. We'll do the same thing. We're just going to feather out the shape. One of the things that I love doing is something that I just call mimicking. And I like to take whatever is done at the top in terms of color and kind of flip it on its head underneath, because it really helps to amplify the shape. And it also is like the easiest way to do a fast shadow application. There's like really nothing to think about. Just mimic what you did at the top and it's going to look really beautiful at the bottom. And this particular application works well on every eye shape. Jordan has a hooded eye and we're still getting this really beautiful, easy, smoky eye with this application. So I have this color exploding through the temples, and it's really nice because it almost looks like the shadow never ends. So from every angle, especially in a photograph, this is going to look so pretty and really connect all of the dots on her face. But I want to explore some more color. And here's where I'm going to layer on some of our waterproof cream palette. And again, I like using contrasting tones, contrasting levels of vibrancy, contrasting finishes, all to bring life when I'm using color. So we're going to go here, which is this shade is slightly neon. It has a tiny bit of a neon effect, but it's still very, very wearable, as you'll see. And I'm just going to use this just to create a gradient of color here on the cheeks. So it almost looks like these purples are kind of like building an intensity up to the eye. And again, this color placement is going to be a nice backdrop to the finishing touches that I'm going to add with highlighter. Okay. And so I'm just tapping this color in, and we have like this really bold explosion of color. And whether this was an editorial or I was doing this just for bridal, I'll still use the same concept. I probably wouldn't use the same intensity of tones, but I love layering color in this way. It makes it really dynamic. It makes it look more interesting. It makes it read beautifully from every angle. And it also, as you layer this way in light layers, it builds subtle intensity and increases the wear. So it does all of the things. Okay. And then I'm going to just take a dry brush and just make sure that I get rid of all of the demarcation lines in this area. So if you wanted to, you can have a little bit of foundation on your brush as well if you needed to like amp up any of the coverage. But I think we're good on coverage. I want to keep her skin looking fresh. I really just want to make sure that this color is almost like a watercolor where just one color just beautifully dilutes into the next and builds slowly in intensity. Just like that. So I'm going to add the smallest touches of powder right now because I want to move into my more intense like finishing items. So we'll do a little bit of powder. I'm going to be using Evolution powder, and this is shade number 3. And you can see it's pulling the color from this beautiful undertone of her chest and in the interiors of her face that we started with. And I'm just going to lightly, wherever I really don't want to see shine, which is generally like right underneath the eye, around these pockets of the nose. Get a little bit more. This powder is really microfine, so you literally do not see it. It works great for film and TV and also for photography. It just keeps the skin looking like natural skin, but you get that set that you need in order to get the contrast that you want between all of these different tones and textures that we're using. This really works beautifully for male grooming as well. It's like that powder you can't see, but it's doing all of the work you need it to do. So a little bit more here around the edges of the mouth. Okay, let me just take a look. Sides of the nose, get rid of a bit of that shine. Just that subtle tapping where we want to minimize the shine a bit, so that those areas we were looking to like lift and pull really shine through. Okay. All right, so now for all of our finishing elements. I want to move into the twin flames that we talked about. So this is a really intense, explosive color and gives like an intense metallic finish as well. And so I'm going to let this kind of sing right on top of that color fix. So I'll use a flatter brush. And you'll see when I apply it, the difference in intensity. You can kind of see it here on the palette. This is a really dynamic duochrome finish. So I'm using that same purple, but at a much greater intensity. And I'm gonna kind of apply it in almost like a halo. I don't know if you could see that difference in the intensity. If you look at this side versus this side, you can really see where adding that other layer of texture kind of amplifies all of the other purples that are there on the eye. And I'll probably finish it off with another one as well. So I'm just gonna, I don't want to cover the entire eye because all of those colors, that layering of color is important for telling this overall color story. But this will definitely amplify the other purple tones that we've used. And I'll just take a fluffy brush, a small fluffy brush, just to make sure that everything is blended and that the intensity of color coverage is as I intended during my application. Let's just see. Lovely. Just making sure that everything is blended. I'm always just, before I move on to the next thing, I just make sure that the last thing that I applied is completely blended and set. Okay. I don't know if you could see the difference there. Oh, there you go. Jordan is the best model ever.
That's what they were saying.
She's incredible. All right, now to add a little bit more interest, and I'm going to come back to the eye, but I want to make sure that everything that's there kind of sets. So I want to focus on a little bit of the highlighter, and I'm going to add a little bit of Illuminating Veil and this really dynamic finish. This is Paradise. And ironically, this can be used on all skin tones. One of the things that was important for me in developing my complexion line is that everything works for everybody. So it doesn't matter who's in your chair, whether it's me or the fairest person you can imagine, we all can share the same products, which I think is really important. So I'm going to add a little bit of this on my palette, and we're going to really help bring out the purples and the pink in her complexion. I'm going to pick out a different brush here. Let me see. I want this to go on nice and light and airy. So a fluffy brush is going to be the name of the game here. I'm going to use this small brush. Oops, sorry about that. I'm gonna go into the highlighter. I chose a smaller brush because I really want to target this application right in here. So I'm gonna take Paradise and bring it right through the tops of the cheekbone and kind of blend that out. Just taking that highlight in this area even further. And so she already has all those other colors underneath. And so that layered effect to me is what creates all the magic. And I'll bring that up through the temples. And again, you saw I only needed the tiniest bit. Just making sure that there's no demarcation lines. And the beautiful thing about this is it's gonna set and this will not move. Like she literally can jump in a pool and come out and she's gonna have the same beautiful complexion and these same highlights because everything that I've used on her is waterproof or super long wearing. Again, I'm just making sure there's no demarcation lines here. How are we there? And you can see, you still see those golden tones. You still see both of these highlighters that we used initially in the beginning with this pink on top. The other thing is that everything that I'm applying sets, so everything is completely dry, but it's creating the illusion of like wet skin, which is also really nice, especially if you are working in photography. You know, if the skin is actually wet or actually very oily, you have less time to play on set, less time to shoot. And so by using products that create the illusion of like that wet finish, you get to shoot forever and ever without touching up, which is great. And you can also add wet products on top or creamy products on top or even powders on top to amplify it without disrupting the makeup. Okay, so let's make sure. I just always like to move the model's face around just to make sure that there's nothing distracting, that there's no like harsh demarcation lines. Everything has a nice fluid feeling. It's effortless. And I think we're there. What do you think, Olga?
Beautiful.
Okay. So we are mimicking all those pinks and purples that we are seeing on the eye onto the face as well. So just really building and layering that color to get that impact. Okay. So I want to add one more tone of Twin Flames. And this is really going to pull what's happening here at the tops of the cheek. This shade is called Angel Heart. And I'm just going to use the tiniest bit. I'll show it to you on my palette. It reflects a little bit of green and pink and purple. So I think this is going to add a lot of interest right here at the center of the lid. And you see how this really pulls in that highlighter shade very beautifully. And I literally need the tiniest bit. I'm going to take the excess off my brush because I don't need it. And I'm just going to feather out the edges. And again, Twin Flames is this multi-chrome pigment. It's going to reflect different colors. This reflects yellow and green and purple, and it's going to really pull all those colors that we worked into the lid together. And it's also helping us to tie in the colors that we used in the highlighter. So the story that's being told now is just so dynamic. Like you see how this pulls to the cheek now, just creating this really cohesive color story. And now with all of this happening on the eye, I don't want to take any attention away from this lift that we created because everything that we've applied is just drawing the attention up. So I'm going to keep the lips nice and neutral. Gorgeous. Isn't she like the most magical human ever? I'm just going to use a nude lip. And for this, I'm going to use Color Fix Nude Glaze. And this is in the shade Coffee. And I honestly just need the tiniest drop. It's super pigmented with lots of coverage. And I'm just going to paint the lips. But I saw an opportunity just now. And let me see if I can do this first. Okay. I really want to make her lips kind of pop a little bit more. So I'm going to go back with Balm Contour and kind of frame out her lip shape. I'm going to use a smaller pencil brush. Especially since I'm using a nude. I'm using Balm Contour. This is a deep one. Just to really get in there and pop the lip shape. And I don't know if you notice how much more fluffy her lips look now. And this is nice because it really just kind of melts into the skin. You can kind of tap around the edges to soften. It's a lot softer than using a pencil to shape, especially when you want to go for a nude lip. And now I'll go in and finish it off with our nude glaze. And again, this is just going to look like a natural lip. Again, I like mixing warm and cool tones together. And you'll see this lip tone that I'm using is a little bit on the cooler side. But for me, it creates a really nice contrast of what's happening on the eye. So for one of the things that as a takeaway from this session, just a takeaway from my just experience in working, I always push to layer as much as possible. I always push to create as much contrast as I possibly can, because makeup is all about contrast. The more contrast that you can create between both texture and tone, the more dramatic the effect will be. And we can create this high impact color that really reflects really beautifully, regardless of skin tone, just by layering contrasting textures, colors, finishes in this way. I just want to take a bite out of her. She's just so yummy. Okay. So I love doing trainings like this. I feel very honored that I was asked to be a part of this summit. This summit is just so incredibly special and so important. And if you're looking to find more ways, tips and tricks for how I work on deeper skin tones, definitely visit my social media, Danessa Myricks, or the university, Danessa Myricks University. There's tons of free classes on there. And we have classes very specifically targeting designing skin for women of color and using color for women of color in the most impactful way. So I think we just about made our time. I can't even believe that we finished all of this on time. I want to thank you again for joining. I want to thank Jordan for being this magical human that she is. And I am trying to see if there's any question. Thank you so much for all these lovely comments. I really appreciate it. The brushes that I used brushes by Katie Jane Hughes. I use brushes by Enot Don. I use brushes by My Kitco. And I use brushes by Cosette. I tend to gravitate to tools that are created by artists because there's so much intention behind them. And so you can't go wrong with any brush from any one of these amazing artists' collection. So we have 1 minute left. Let me see if I see any.
Angels answered all the questions.
Okay, great. It seems like all of the questions have been answered. And
Pepper.
Pepper, thank you so much for answering so many of those questions. I really appreciate it. And thank you again, Jordan, for just being exquisite and just so wonderful. Jordan's Instagram is Jordan is a girl name on IG. So please follow her. She's incredible. And I think we made it right on time. Let's see. So again, thank you guys for joining, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the summit. I know that I'm going to jump off and jump into the next sessions as well. This has been one of the most incredible days of education, and the panels have been just so incredibly inspiring. And I'm just really, again, so honored that the Black Beauty roster invited me to be a part of this summit and allowing me to be a part of this important conversation. So thank you so much.